Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, depending on where you are. To make yourselves comfortable, give it another minute just to let everyone join in. Please do start using the chat, start introducing yourselves, where you're from. Get started in a bit, just make yourself comfortable. Hello, everyone. You've said hello in the chat already. I'll get started now. I will just do some intros to start with, so if anyone joins a bit later, they won't miss too much. So, as I said, yeah, good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending where you are. My name's Harry Saville. I'm a managing consultant psychologist here at CiC. So welcome to our webinar on neurodiversity in the workplace. So very much looking at what neurodiversity is and the value it can bring to your organisations. So a bit about myself. So I've been working in the field of neurodiversity on and off for about 10 years. So started off straight out of uni working in having first studied psychology and neuroscience, worked in schools to support neurodivergent children of a variety of ages in primary school and secondary school and university as well. Moved into one-to-one coaching, supported a lot of people in the workplace who are neurodivergent, developing their own strategies for their ways of working, understanding themselves better, and really kind of thriving in the workspace. Before moving more recently in my career into consultancy. So looking at organisations, how do we create more inclusive workspaces for people from a neurodiversity perspective, but also just general well-being, how are we helping create that psychological safety in the places we work. So what we'll go through today, as I said, looking at really understanding what neurodiversity is, where that term has come from, and some common diagnoses you might have heard of that fall under that. Talking about the value of neurodiversity in the workplace, all the really valuable skills that neurodiversity can bring to you and your organisation. Current reality, challenges in the workplace, what we see kind of workplaces doing to support neurodiversity, some of the challenges we can see in the workplace as well. It'd be good to hear your experiences throughout that, kind of see if you've had any challenges yourself, if you've seen any challenges in your workspace. And lastly, just finishing off with what neurodiversity offerings we have at CiC moving forward as well. So if you want to find out more, is there any way we can support you? You know what we can do and you can reach out to us. As you've already started doing, a lot of you already started using the chat already, which is great. So there'll be opportunities for you to kind of ask questions at the end. But as we go through, there'll be discussions throughout. So please do share your reflections. If there's something that speaks to you, your own experiences, please do share that. There'll be someone else on the call maybe that really resonates with. So please do share your thoughts. Take part in discussions. Share your top tips. Share your experiences, your ideas. Be really, really helpful. So firstly, on that note, using the chat for this question, please don't feel free to, if you feel like maths isn't your strong point, that's totally fine. If you'd rather just sit and watch, that's totally fine for this one. So I'm going to ask you a question based on, it's a post that was put on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, used to try and demonstrate what neurodiversity is all about. So if you're willing to, please do share your thoughts in the chat, kind of how you'd approach this question. A common answer I usually get is grabbing a calculator. So like I said, if it's not for you, it's totally fine. Don't worry. Purpose of this, hopefully, is to show that even with a question like that, you might all approach a problem in a slightly different way. It's great to see those people putting their thoughts in the chat already. So someone said breaking it down, piece it together. So thank you, Simon. And Natalie's put in 60 plus 15. So adding the tens and units separately. I think someone's exactly the same just after. I think someone's been rounding up and then down again. I always find that really confusing. Uh, one of anyone who can do that, that's never something that's good for me. I always do maybe add 7 to 28, you've got 35, then add 40. See if there's any other ones here. Does anyone differently? Yeah. And mine is put in, yeah, I think use a calculator. Yeah, so don't worry. Yeah, so that's the most common response I get. So don't worry, you're not alone there. Panic, yeah, panic and calculator tends to be the big two. So don't worry. You're not alone with that. So lots of different ones there. 3 cycles of 20 plus 40, 8 plus 7 to confirm the same answer, checking you're working. Very good. A few people have been brave enough to put the answer in as well. So the answer is 75, if anyone's interested. So yeah, if you can see there, if everyone looks in the chat, how many different ways people have all answered that question. So it's a really good way of just demonstrating how, like I said, there's a spectrum of how we all approach a problem. Even something as simple as that. So I'm just going to the lobby. I have to let a few more people in. There we go. And that's a perfect way of talking about what neurodiversity is. So neurodiversity refers to the different ways, we process information. So it's not natural variations in human brain functioning, embraces that people have different ways of thinking, different ways of learning, processing information. It highlights that people naturally think about things differently. We're all kind of unique. We all sit in that complex spectrum of different strengths and different challenges. So I always like this picture to talk about neurodiversity. It's something that's used in a lot of different sources, but it's a nice way of just showing, how we all have different ways of looking at the world and different strengths that we can bring to a team, organization, even talking about things of different perspective. Some people might be more number driven, some people more problem solvers, visual thinkers, more analytical. Some people think more linearly, some people think more kind of in like a mind map. Some people more analytical, some process driven. We all have their variations. And that's what really neurodiversity is referring to. It's also an umbrella term, some common diagnosis or learning differences you may have heard of. So I've made a little umbrella with some diagnoses underneath here that I've often worked with or seen. So this isn't an exhaustive list. It's always evolving as awareness grows, as more diagnosis being added. So these are just some of the most common ones that we've seen. But the key thing from this is to remember everyone's experience is unique. So two people could have the same diagnosis, may present very differently in terms of their challenges and strengths. There'll be a threshold people meet to get a certain diagnosis, but there'll be a variation in the kind of the characteristics included within that. So that can lead to different challenges, different strengths, different ways that it appears to you. So just because you've seen one person with dyslexia doesn't mean you've met everyone and understand how everyone with dyslexia may work. This may also depend on the role they're doing, the situation someone's in. So you think about people you've seen in school or at home or in the workplace, how they present and the challenges they may have might be different. Someone may also have multiple diagnoses, so those can impact on the characteristics for that individual. So if you think about if you're dyslexic and have dyspraxia or have ADHD and autism, how those characteristics look for you may be very different. So always bearing that in mind, I think remembering it as, not just from a diagnosis perspective, but that individual approach. Everyone is unique and has their own manifestation of how those characteristics look. So always keep an open mind, look at the individual as an individual. Question for you now. So what percentage of the population do you think are neurodivergent? So this is an ever-evolving number as well. So it'd be good to hear your thoughts. Please do share your thoughts in the chat. No peeking if anyone skipped through the slides. Give an honest answer. Some 5%, around 20, 15 to 20, 80%. Trying to put in very high. 7%, 25%, 10%, 20 to 30%, maybe 25% plus, someone's put in there. So always rising, it's a good question. 30% more than you'd expect, definitely. We'll talk about that on the next slide as well. Someone's put in 1%, so gone really low compared to the others there. Again, someone's mentioned a lot more than you'd think. 45%, 35%. Very mixed bag here. I think a lot of people go anywhere from 1% to 80% I've seen so far. So to a certain degree, 100%, I suppose that's a good point. I suppose in one side, thinking about us all in the spectrum, we all kind of slightly have our own ways of doing things. I think with this question in particular, we'll look at those with a particular diagnosis. So a lot more, 20%, 40%. I'll move on now. Please keep sharing your thoughts. So officially, 15 to 20% is the number. So this is based on a biopsychosocial model by Nancy Doyle from 2020. There's a Neurodiversity at Work report. That report is available, which we can share afterwards as well if anyone's interested. So looking at neurodiversity and the impact on working adults. As a few of you have alluded to in the chat already, let's think about this number a little bit. So this number used to be 1 in 7, I think, when I first started doing some of these presentations. So roughly about 15%, and that was only a couple of years ago. So why has this number changed? Any thoughts? Why do you think this number is changing or so rapidly? Georgina's put a good thought there. Some more awareness, more investigation, better diagnosis, more recognition. Yeah, so everyone's definitely got that one, more understanding. Maybe the pandemic lockdown is a really good point. Someone's put in there. Yeah, so I remember writing an article about that a couple of years ago, thinking about the impact of loneliness and the exposure of maybe people's coping mechanisms, people feeling kind of isolated, thrown into a different situation, and they've had to adapt to a different situation, maybe not realize the coping mechanisms they put in place. So absolutely, that's a really good point. Larger acceptance, definitely. More getting diagnosed, more access to resources. Yeah, so a lot of you have noticed that kind of link to a growing awareness, more diagnosis, reduced stigma. So I'm glad someone used that word. So the reduced stigma around diagnosis, not only the raising awareness, but also reduction in stigma attached to the diagnosis. People feel less, there's less negative connotations attached to those diagnoses. We're thinking more about the positives along with those diagnoses as well. Yes, better environments, media publicizing certain things more, leading people to seek diagnosis, absolutely. Adults, not just children, going for diagnosis, absolutely. The amount of times I've gone for coaching in the workplace or workplace needs assessments, and you see people who maybe in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and some of these diagnoses or the language used for them just wasn't available when they were at school. It was talked about in a completely different way. So maybe they're in a role, they'd always, as we all do, we gravitate to our strengths. They're in a position where they're utilizing the skills that they have. There's no need for them to seek any additional support or they've not really seen or had reason to go for a diagnosis. Maybe they've then encountered a change in their role, maybe a change in manager, or more admin's been added to their role, for example, maybe a slight change in their role, and suddenly they kind of panic and lose control in that situation. They've gone for a diagnosis later, something I've seen a few times. Someone's mentioned Chris Packham in the chat there. So yeah, absolutely. Really, if you haven't seen some of his documentaries on BBC, they're really interesting, just showing how he's coped with his autism diagnosis throughout his life, the differences he experiences, maybe communicating with others. But he's got that massive level of knowledge around his area of interest, which leads him to be very good at his role. He just got to navigate the workplace in a slightly different way. What else we've got in here? So I mentioned Sheldon. So yeah, links to the Big Bang Theory. Was this study done on 1798 people? I'm not sure the exact numbers, but we can have a look afterwards. Someone's put a question in the chat. Do you think people now perceive having a diagnosis as beneficial? I think there's strengths and weaknesses in early diagnosis. On one hand, I've heard tens, hundreds of times people saying, this diagnosis has really helped me feel like I understand myself better, stop blaming myself or beating myself up, feel like a weight's been lifted. Because you have that terminology, you know where you can access support a lot more easier. You know you can access support groups with, for example, ADHD diagnosis. You know where to go. And also you can understand maybe a bit about yourself, but also maybe things you haven't considered. It's making you think about more the bigger picture as well, which is definitely interesting. On the other side, people may prefer just thinking about themselves, individuals, and their particular way of working. And I think there's benefits of both, and it's down to the individual based on what they want to do. I'll come back to the chat afterwards, conscious of time. I'll keep moving forward, but thanks everyone for putting their thoughts in. What we're going to do now is go through some of the, I guess, the three top diagnoses that we saw in the previous slides there with the umbrella. So looking at dyslexia, ADHD, and autism. So not to say that the only bits of neurodiversity that are important, but just some of the three most common ones we see. So I'll go through those in a bit more detail. Starting off with dyslexia, someone just shared the Chris Packham documentary in the chat. That's really helpful. Thank you. I remember watching that a couple of years ago. It was really, really interesting. It's a perfect example of how someone brings a lot of strengths to the workplace, but maybe makes some subtle adjustments to how they work with others, which is what we want to be doing here. To start off with dyslexia. So please, everyone share in the chat kind of what your experiences of dyslexia are. If anyone is dyslexic in the chat, what does that look like for you? I'll show the definition here as well. So it's defined as a specific learning difficulty, which primarily affects reading and writing skills. So it's a dictionary definition. It's often also quite a stereotypical view of dyslexia. But please do share your thoughts in the chat. If anyone's got their own experiences of dyslexia, what does that look like for you? What kind of traits do you see? I'll keep sharing information as we go. So some of the common challenges you see, I think stereotypically, often associated with reading and writing. So I'm sure we all saw at school that kind of link with getting ideas down on paper, taking information from the board or information in textbooks. That's often some of the traits and characteristics we often see. And with that, it might be taking information from reading on its own. Along with that, it might be with visual processing differences. You might see people struggling with actually visually seeing the text on the page. So we've heard of people experiencing visual stress, especially with contrasting colours, so black text on white background, for example, where text can almost look like it's blurry or kind of moving around the page. Whereas when they're reading off a different coloured background, so if you see people reading off blue backgrounds, green backgrounds, for example, that's a way of helping reduce that contrast and helps the words sit better on the page. With getting ideas down on paper, it might be actually articulating them in writing. It might be very good at articulating them verbally, struggle with getting them down in writing concisely or accurately in terms of spelling. Verbal processing, thinking about listening in a meeting, something a common challenge I've heard some people have is when they're in meetings, trying to hold on to all the information, process all the information that's being said at once, and then kind of the stress from that is taking notes on what's happening, making sure they're following through. That can lead to a lot of anxiety as well. Working memory, so that's we'll see it as like a mental sticky note in the brain. So being able to hold on to one bit of information, shift to something else quickly, and come back to what you were doing. People might leave things half finished in their work. Some potential strengths though, so there's always two sides of the coin, and that's what we're trying to focus on today, although the challenges, there's a lot of benefits to your organisation as well. So communication, rapport building, the amount of people I've done assessments for, they're working in client-facing roles, very good at working with people, whether it be, with assessments I've done, but also colleagues I've had as well. Very good at working with people, rapport building, talking over the phone or talking in person. Problem solving, creative as well, so being able to kind of work with people's problems, come up with solutions. Innovation, entrepreneurial skills. So there's an article from Forbes magazine a couple of years ago that found that 35% of entrepreneurs attribute their success to being dyslexic or dyslexic traits. So I'm sure you can name a few in the chat of people who might identify as being dyslexic who have entrepreneurial skills. So Richard Branson's obviously a big one in the UK. Also visual learners, so maybe less is having challenges with the written side, but more visual in terms of the way they learn or their preference for taking information. Let's come to the chat quickly here now. So many of the social enterprises have neurodiversity that I support. It was good. Jamie Oliver's, someone's mentioned here as well. Good at practical problem solving, absolutely. So linking into that creativity, outside the box thinking. So someone mentioned here, so after being diagnosed as a child, I'm still understanding how dyslexia affects me on a day-to-day basis. There are pros and cons. I also consider it a superpower. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of skills and benefits that come from that, I'm sure, in your life there, Gavin. So thank you for sharing that. Steven Spielberg is dyslexic as well. Someone just shared. That's interesting. You see in the creative industries how many people come up there because of those creative skills. So please do keep sharing your examples and your own experiences as well. I'll move on to ADHD now. So this, by definition, is, if anyone's not sure what it stands for, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So it stands for ADHD. So it's marked by an ongoing pattern of inattention and or hyperactivity, impulsivity. So people can have, there's two types there, the inattentive or hyperactivity, impulsivity, or both. Someone's mentioned that in all three of those. So yeah, it can be challenging. You might have also heard of ADD. So it's like attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, but just minus the hyperactivity. So people might feel a bit, seem less kind of restless or hyperactive. It's more kind of, might look more inattentive and struggle to stay on task in what they're doing. That's where the challenges can be, is when people don't present exactly how you may expect them to. It often leads to some misdiagnosis or underdiagnosis as well. I think I saw a comment flash up in the chat earlier about the differences between men and women. There's a massive underdiagnosis in women and girls through school and early late education or in the workplace as well, because of the differences in how it might present. I think often the stereotype view, obviously, you said with ADHD as an example here, that more kind of hyperactive side, whereas women might present in a different way. I think it shows how the level of awareness, not only amongst ourselves, but also maybe amongst those doing the diagnosis as well, needs to improve. So I think that's hopefully leveling out over time. Some of the challenges I see, is something I still work with on a regular basis. Still do a lot of coaching with individuals who have ADHD now. So a lot of the challenges I see often revolve around executive functioning. So which I've outlined here, sort of organisation, planning, prioritising work. So you might see people struggling with kind of planning things out, prioritising what's easiest as opposed to what needs to be done. It's not planning ahead, leaving too much to the last minute. Sustaining attention and goal-directed persistence, maybe staying on task, find themselves being put off easily or not finding it easy to be distracted. Working memory, again, similar to dyslexia. So some of the people I've worked with in the past saying their teachers when they're growing up, the PE teacher is always the hardest to listen to because they might give them, at school, because they might give them a list of a sequence of instructions, but without writing it down. So they have to try and remember all those the sequence of the instructions all at once, and find themselves coping by copying others about what they need to be doing in that PE lesson. Response inhibitions, people may be accused of being reactive, so that impulsivity, maybe in the way they speak or their actions. And emotional control, so sometimes emotions can feel or seem a bit more heightened, so they might come across as more reactive in certain settings. Some of you already mentioned some of the strengths in the chat there, so like hyperfocus being a massive strength working under pressure. So often utilised by people with ADHD as a coping mechanism, maybe leaving things sometimes too late to a deadline, so they can really tap into that. So like a lot of you said, it's a massive strength, the ability to, under pressure and when there's a real clear priority and something needs to be done, people really click into gear. And I think that's something really important with ADHD. It's often just thought as someone who can't focus at any time, inability to focus, always distractible. It's really dependent on, the topic. If there's something someone's really interested in and passionate about, they might find themselves really focused on for a long time. And if there's that bit of pressure, so they can find themselves really kind of, if there's a bit of pressure, clear deadlines, you can really zero in on what they're doing. That kind of spotlight of attention really zeroes in. So it's about how you utilize that. So you kind of avoiding that burnout. I think when people leave things too frequently to the last minute, they find themselves really exhausted at the end of it, and that impacts on their life outside of work as well. So something I would often talk about as coaching is that kind of artificial deadlines, creating those little bits of pressure to help kind of manage that throughout a month if you're going through a project. Also creativity. So thinking about because people maybe think in less of a linear way with ADHD, thinking more off the beaten path is called that kind of thinking. Leads them to think of more creative or different solutions, out of the box solutions, maybe someone else wouldn't have thought of. So you mix all that together, kind of working under pressure, needing a solution quickly. You have to think in different ways. People can think of very creative solutions on the spot. Maybe others take a while to get to. So yeah, lots of really valuable skills there. I'll give an example of that working under pressure, where the clients I used to work with, they would say when there's a lull in work, there's a lot of little things they could be doing, but no real deadline for anything, no pressure to do anything. They find themselves kind of leaving things half finished, kind of meandering through the day, not really focused on anything fully. But then they prefer it's a bit more pressure on a particular task. So then they can zero in on what they need to do. So it's really interesting. It's something that can definitely be utilized. It's a way, of course, like a few of you have mentioned in the chat there, I saw pop up, make sure people don't burn themselves out in doing that. So how do we help with them with the organization phase to help them manage that through their workday. Last on our list here is autism. So please do keep sharing your thoughts in the chat, kind of what that looks like for you, what you've heard of, what maybe family members you see who have autism and what that looks like for them. This is very broad in its spectrum and how it might present. So it's defined as a neurological and developmental condition that affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn and behave. So that can look very different depending on the individual. So potential challenges, first of all, so thinking about non-verbal communication. So people might struggle with processing, understanding those non-verbal communications, things that aren't literally said. So things like tone of voice, things said between the lines, body language, things like that might be harder for them to process or catch up or pick up on. Even with language, so use of sarcasm or jokes or things said between the lines might not be picked up on. They might find it hard to understand if it's not literally said. So taking things a lot more literally. So, for example, idioms might be something that people find harder to process or understand and find it confusing. Dealing with change. Something I think for all of us, change to a certain degree and uncertainty cause a lot of stress. One of the main causes of stress for people with autism can be particularly stressful. And when they very process or prefer processes or routines, when there is a change to those routines, they might have a set way of coming to work, set train they get, set patterns they like, set timetable they like to follow. But when there's a change to that something that can really be quite overwhelming. So I think how you deliver change in the day, give people time to process that is really important. And lastly, sensory sensitivity. So this is something that I became more aware of really when I worked at a school and worked with people more one-to-one on a regular basis. So this is where people with autism can experience heightened sensitivities to sensory input in their environment. So you may have seen supermarkets having quieter hours for neurodivergent children when they reduce the lights, dim the lights, reduce the music, or the volume of the music. That's to allow those families to come in with children so they don't find that as overwhelming. Similarly, I know I've seen in sports stadiums, you see there's like sensory rooms now where people can go so they don't experience that the kind of the overwhelming nature of some stadiums, we might see people wearing like ear defenders in public, noise cancelling headphones or noise cancelling earmuffs just to reduce the sound in their environment. These are all examples of where people might really struggle with the sensory input in their environment. So that could be anything from lighting, kind of temperatures, smells, sounds, acoustics of a room. I'm sure if anyone here now is in the office, or even the home environment. Or if we think about how you travel to work, think about if you're commuting on a train or public transport, if you're thinking about the streets you're on, if you're in your office, thinking about the lights, the noise of air conditioning or heating. There's so many things that can cause a lot of overwhelm with these individuals. And something that I've worked on in the past is thinking about those environmental spaces and how we kind of create a space that's supportive and inclusive of people who do experience that, to make sure there's different environments, different people within an office space. On the flip side, the potential strengths here. So a lot of areas here that lots of organisations are trying to tap into, which I'll talk about in the value side next as well. So the analytical skills, attention to detail, pattern recognition. These are skills that lots of organisations are trying to tap into now, and which I'll demonstrate later. Also, process-driven, so that preference for kind of routine can actually be really valuable. Where some people might be a bit more off the cuff, having someone there to really kind of drive a process, build something that's really useful for everyone else is really valuable. To create kind of a bit of uniformness within a team or organisation as well. Also, as that reliability, if you know someone's going to follow a process and do it reliably, consistently, it's also something that's really, really beneficial. Whereas someone else, maybe someone with ADHD, might struggle with a process, prefer having that kind of novelty of something new more regularly, jumping into new tasks. It's nice to have that variability, isn't it? You have some people who maybe prefer that, whereas others prefer having more of a routine to their day. So thanks everyone. I can see the chats moving very quickly. So apologies, I'm just reading through the information on the slide, but thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts in the chat. I'm sure there's lots of helps bring a lot of this information to life, people sharing their own experiences, whether it be from themselves or from their family or people they work with, and it might resonate with a lot of other people here in the chat as well. So thinking about those skills we've spoken about, what neurodivergent skills would your organisation or team benefit from? So you can be really specific maybe with what you do, kind of what skills there that we've spoken about do you feel like would actually be really beneficial for how you work and what you do? Jump in the chat now, see what people put. Good in a crisis, absolutely. You might also think about kind of diagnosis and the kind of skills people might use in different sectors. I've definitely seen that with different sectors have different neurotypes coming up more and more frequently. So good in a crisis, definitely a good one. The skill to understand and accommodate other neurodiverse people, also very good. The ability to empathise and understand them more as well, definitely. Taking a consistent approach, definitely that kind of routine-based. Nancy's mentioned here as an ADHD, so that's someone who has autism and ADHD. I can do a big picture and details at the same time. I find most people are either one or the other. Yeah, exactly. It's a perfect example of what I was saying earlier when we talk about people with dual diagnosis, how we can make assumptions about if you hear one diagnosis, oh, they're going to be like this. But actually, those blend together when you've got a few diagnoses, gives you that own unique blend. So why it's always important to really take each individual at face value. Don't think when you hear a diagnosis, you know exactly what people are going to go through. So thanks for sharing that, Nancy. Technical skills, people skills, absolutely. It's people working with people on a regular basis. It's build rapport, builds connections. So important. Special interests, something we're talking about with Jeremy. So Packham as well. The ability to have real deep knowledge of a particular area of interest. Something I should have included on the autism slide actually when we're talking about that. So yeah, being able to remember key details, have a large level of knowledge in an area of interest, something really valuable to make excel in departments such as IT, accountancy. I think in lots of areas, actually. I've heard in lots of different organisations where they've had someone who have that skill and they can pick out a really key detail from a particular case they've worked on maybe years ago. Others can't remember off the top of their head. Think about people working in the legal sector as well. Key details within documentation, checking, reviewing processes for others, also very valuable. More awareness of what triggers people. Exactly, as someone mentioned earlier, that ability to notice in others. If you have that, you can create a safer space for others. Creativity. Yes, so Georgina's mentioned here that creativity, working in the creative industry. I saw a statistic somewhere that we talked about 15 to 20% in the creative industries that can look like 50% You see a higher level of people who are creative or who are neurodivergent, sorry. So you might see certain skills, creative skills in the creative industry. You might see people with those analytical skills in the legal industry or tech industries. So you might see the gravitation of certain neurotypes to different areas as well. Analytics, I mentioned. Librarians, that attention to detail, consistency, specialisms, thinking in a different way, not afraid to ask questions, definitely really good. Natalie's mentioned is listening to an individual and then acting on what they can do to make things better for them. Yes, that kind of active listening, something we'll talk about later as well. Just different ways of thinking, obviously beneficial to an organisation. If we all thought the same way, we'd all be in our own little echo chamber and not having any new ideas. So I think really encouraging that is really valuable. I'll quickly move on to, I'll just share a few other bits here, just a summary of all the skills we've spoken about. As we said, thinking back to that slide I had right at the start with the different brains with pictures of some being like a jigsaw piece, some big numbers, having all those different thinking styles, having all those different ways of approaching a problem helps us come up with the best solution or different solutions to problems, helps us innovate quicker. So this is, again, I think someone mentioned the value of having different skills in a team. And that's one of the biggest benefits. Diversity is such a massive benefit of this. I'll show you some research that's come up throughout the years here, just showing the benefit and the value of neurodiversity in the workplace. So first of all, something that's come up in, I think it was 2017, from the Harvard Business Review, so coined neurodiversity as a competitive advantage. So seeing neurodivergent talent as an untapped talent pool, or relatively untapped talent pool, with great potential to fill roles or gaps in emerging professions, so plug that talent gap in certain industries. So some of those, a few of you mentioned in the chat there, thinking about the tech industry. EY works in a report with Made by Dyslexia, so highlighting the value of these skills that we just spoke about. Think about the future workforce, and especially in the evolving state of the world and how fast and rapidly the world is changing. If you think about this world now with the innovations with AI, automation, what skills do you think are most valuable in the future of work, or what skills that we're teaching our children in schools are going to be the most useful in the future? Is it going to be being able to sit still for long periods, have nice joints up handwriting, or is it that ability to think outside the box, that innovative innovation, entrepreneurial skills, analytical skills, critical thinking? Those skills can be more valuable. And I think that's what a lot of organizations are starting to realize and really try and create those neuro-inclusive workspaces to try and kind of adapt to the future workspace. A few other bits here. So LinkedIn, if anyone's on LinkedIn and they are dyslexic, you can, or if you know someone who is dyslexic, they've added dyslexic thinking as a personal skill. So because of the skills we've already mentioned, you think about those skills that we talked about in terms of rapport building, problem solving, thinking outside the box, entrepreneurial skills, innovation. It fits a lot of valuable skills that are useful for, from a leadership position, managing position, communication position, creativity, and also been added to the dictionary as well. So the dictionary definition down the bottom here. So dyslexic thinking defined as an approach to problem solving, assessing information and learning, often used by people with dyslexia that involves pattern recognition, spatial reasoning, lateral thinking, and interpersonal communication. So really trying to flip that narrative away from that old stereotype that we all know about, kind of thinking about reading and writing, and more towards the value added and different ways of thinking. And you see now all the different kind of neurodiversity programs popping up where organizations are trying to embrace neurodiversity. These are just a few that I've heard of, been lucky enough to go in and work in with doing assessments and coaching, and just through a bit of research as well. So please do share any others you've heard of, or even your own organizations if you've got any good kind of support or programs going on to support neurodiversity in your teams. So I'll talk through a few of these here. So Microsoft, first of all, so they created a neurodiversity hiring program, aims to hire people with a range of neurodifferences. They've established a employee-led resource group So again, really useful to helping that create that psychological safety, something we'll talk about later. Help raise awareness, create that kind of peer support. SAP is a German multinational software corporation, also actively promote neurodiversity, have their own program, ERG as well. JP Morgan Chase, really interesting ones. They have their neurodiversity program specifically around autism at work. Aims to recruit, train, and hire people with autism for technology related roles. They did a side-by-side comparison, so they're autistic employees with, I guess, the neurotypical teams or people who've been there for a lot longer in the organisation, and they found they saw a 90 to 140% productivity increase for those who were in the neurodivergent category. So not to put the pressure on anyone here who is neurodivergent to say that you're going to be super productive, but it just shows the value of when you put those adjustments in place, the benefits to the organisation. EY also have their EY Neurodiversity Centres of Excellence, so it promotes neurodiversity in the workplace, provides training, support for neurodiverse employees. We've also established partnerships with organisations that promote neurodiversity, such as the National Autistic Society. HP have created a neurodiversity program as well. Goldman Sachs got a hiring initiative, so I think a lot of you will talk about on the next slide, kind of the challenges in recruitment as well. It's aimed to hire neurodivergent talent in different ways. So instead of having sort of outdated recruitment practices, interviews, they instead kind of used an 8-week paid internship looking at kind of workshops, mentorship, almost like an internship to help them settle into the role and kind of demonstrate their skills on the job. Google Cloud as well, got their own neurodiversity projects. Auticon is one I've been lucky enough to go in myself and doing some assessments in. So this is an IT consulting organisation who the largest majority autistic company in the world. So they have been actively hiring autistic candidates because of their skill sets, those skill sets we spoke about earlier. And they help create an inclusive environment by offering the training to staff, having the adjustments there, job coaches on site. Some interesting stats from their own impact study they found. So of their employees or their autistic employees, neurodivergent employees, they found that 64% were unemployed before being hired. 77% say they can be their authentic self at work. 84% say they feel valued for who they are. 78% reported improvements in well-being. 74% feel more confident since working at Auticon. So it shows the value in their work as well. If anyone's got any, they'd like to find out more, they've got loads of really interesting information on their website. So I'd recommend looking up Auticon. So that's unfortunately their logo isn't very informative, just an A, but it's spelled AUTICON. We'll have to share some information afterwards if anyone can't find it. Unfortunately, there are still some barriers to support and creating those inclusive workspaces. So what barriers might a neurodivergent candidate or employee face in the workplace? So what are your experiences? What have you seen, maybe from an individual perspective or in your teams, maybe if you're working in recruitment or in HR? What are the classic kind of barriers you see? So Jordan's put in here, non-inclusive interview processes, definitely a massive one. How we hire people can be very rigid and not inclusive of people who are neurodivergent. If you think about some of those verbal processing skills, that can be a challenge. The social anxiety someone might experience with autism, maybe a challenge, maybe maintaining eye contact, people looking at it as being less communicative. It being considered too much effort to make adjustments, not understanding the value it adds, definitely really massive there. Real lack of understanding and support. Ryan's mentioned here as well, interviews seem like a popularity test. Absolutely, it's not what we're really testing for. Are the skills we're looking for in an interview, what people are demonstrating in an interview, what we're asking people to demonstrate? Are they really what's going to be shown on the job? Really, I think of that Goldman Sachs 8-week internship. Obviously not possible at all organisations, but things like that, a way to try and reinvent the interview process or the recruitment process is so great. looking at how you recruit. Someone's mentioned here, so Nancy's mentioned the language you use, who gets to see the advert. Absolutely, it's thinking before you even show the advert, what are you showing, what are you presenting, how are you encouraging people to hire you, for a neurodivergent to join the organisation. Rigid working times, a lack of flexibility. Someone's mentioned here, Charles mentioned providing interviewees with their questions beforehand. So you allow people to process their thoughts beforehand. It's always, when I've done recruitment sessions before, it's always a sticking point with some old recruiters kind of saying it's very unfair to do so. But really, what's the damage? It really is just allowing everyone to process their experience and demonstrate or express their experience in the clearest way. It's allowing you to see the best candidate for the role. All you're doing is cheating yourself out the best candidate if you're not allowing them to show their skills for you. So yeah, definitely a good one. Paul is putting the candidate might, from their own perspective, not want to disclose the fact they are neurodiverse. Absolutely. I guess the question is, why is that? And how are we asking people if they're neurodivergent? Something people experience at interviews, but also joining a job. I've forgotten the exact statistics, but I think it was around 40% of people who don't disclose their neurodivergent until they're already 6 months into a role, because they're worried about how it's going to be seen and if they're going to be discriminated against. So often leading to them only getting support, maybe more than in a crisis, less proactively. Concerns about disclosure, yeah, thinking about that stigma. Ableism screams loudly, most recruitment practices, yeah, so maybe not fully accommodating it. Some of the assessment processes you go through are like going through a dyslexia assessment. Yes, they're almost really uninclusive of dyslexic needs and challenges with some of the stuff we spoke about earlier, and not accessible as well. It's helping make them more accessible. Difficulty completing forms, absolutely, really one I've heard a lot. Someone's, yeah, so Joseph's mentioned here, just agreeing with what we talked about earlier about not wanting to disclose. So someone mentioned this, well, son refusing to disclose this runs into a lot of issues. Yeah, so it can lead to more issues. You think if we're not in a safe space, we don't feel safe to share. It leads to our problems getting worse. So how do we create a safe space is something that's really important. Just conscious of time, thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts. I can get to them all. I'll just keep moving on, but please do keep sharing as we go through. Here's some other barriers that I've seen. So a lot of you mentioned lack of awareness of neurodiversity in the organisation, lack of manager awareness as well is a big one, or confidence I should have put in there as well, manager confidence as well. I think when they feel like they're not confident in addressing the issue, they're worried about what to say, then they just shy away from saying anything, and then they're left the individual's left kind of on their own. Stigma around diagnosis, something we've spoken about a lot. Lack of support or resources, are there support resources available? The policies and processes are not neuro-inclusive, so thinking about recruitment processes like we spoke about, the onboarding processes, stuff like that. No clear adjustment process in recruitment, talent management, rigid ways of working. So I mentioned earlier, kind of no flexibility in the hours of work. Some people might find it really exhausting to work a certain pattern, so they might find it easy to break up their day in a different way. It doesn't mean they can't do the role. They'll be able to get the same results, but doing it in a way that suits them. So creating that flexibility. And the perception of unfairness around adjustments, definitely a big one that I've seen, where people or even managers are worried about giving adjustments because they say, I guess that is that question around equality over equity, and their argument is very much thinking, oh, sorry, equity over equality even. So their perception, they're thinking of, well, we have to treat everyone exactly the same, and if we treat anyone slightly differently, then that's unfair on everyone else. And actually, it's about how do we adapt to each individual's needs. We have all our own needs, our own situations, our own preferences. So how do we adjust to each individual? And that's what we want to achieve. Another big one here, a lot of you have alluded to kind of lack of disclosure, people feeling unsafe to do so. People can do that in recruitment, but also in the workplace as well. So it really comes down to the idea of psychological safety. So this is the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. So from a neurodiversity perspective, it's that fear of being discriminated against for being neurodivergent. So a few of you have mentioned not disclosing during interviews. People might be waiting till later. That's something that I've definitely seen a lot of. Here's some really interesting stats from the Neurodiversity and Business report. So this is from last year. And they found that 65% of neurodivergent employees fear discrimination from management, 55% of neurodivergent employees fear discrimination from colleagues. So if you think about how people feel about talking about being neurodivergent, there might be someone you're working with who has a diagnosis who isn't sharing that at all. And what often people do is mask through their differences. And that'll be the same with when we talk about from a well-being perspective as well. People can often mask their challenges, not talk about it, put on a smiling face, and get on with the day. And so from your perspective, you might look at them and think they're not having any issues, but actually they might be having a lot of challenges that you can't see. From a neurodiversity perspective as well, what people might do, they try and kind of cope with the challenges that are in front of them. It might lead to more fatigue and further well-being challenges. So if you think about, for example, working in a sensory environment that's really stressful, people might find themselves in that environment because they feel they have to, there's no other way around it. And they leave and get home and they're more exhausted at the end of the day. They might struggle with staying focused on a particular task or find their work really overwhelming, and they find it hard to stay focused at their desk for long periods without taking breaks. But they're worried about taking breaks more regularly because they're worried about how that looks. Again, leads to more fatigue at the end of the day. And that can really fall into a vicious cycle of burnout later on as well. So how can we get in the way of that? How can we avoid that? So thinking about a supportive culture can help prevent the escalation of challenges. So what can you do to create that psychological safety? Something I've heard a lot of times of people saying, well, I can't help people if they don't come and ask me for support. It's about that first step, thinking about what do we do to create that safe environment, to encourage people to talk in the first instance. And you might be surprised who comes forward and starts talking. To John putting here, in my experience, there is still a real lack of understanding in the workplace of neurodiversity. Organisations talk about it, but don't have a good understanding of neurodiversity. Yeah, so it's still, I think it's definitely gotten a lot of more exposure in recent years. I agree with that. Still a lot more work to be done. So some people might still be at the first stage, that kind of building that understanding, that general awareness. But what that actually looks like in their teams or their structure, their sort of strategies or their processes, it's still not fully understood. So that's a good point. Paul has shared here, so we have a neurodiversity lead. She does neurodiversity sessions for us employees. That's excellent. So you've got someone kind of accountable for that neurodiversity inclusion, talking about having sessions, sharing the information, sharing the value of that, what it's about, giving people space to talk. And that's really useful. Do events for workplace staffs. Absolutely. I think it's a useful way of, I think, just talking about it, communicating is really, really valuable. I can just put a question about the slides. I will be sharing the recording after today, and I believe we'll make the slides available for this session. So yeah, if you miss anything, don't worry, we'll be able to follow up later. Any other ideas about creating psychological safety? I think it's definitely communication, definitely a good one. Is there anything we can do as managers or leaders to help encourage people to talk? What do you think? Yeah, so Melissa's put in here, kind of building that trust. So how do you build trust? Thinking about creating an environment people feel safe to talk about it. So maybe sharing what's available, maybe sharing what you can do, encouraging conversations. I think that's definitely important. Well-designed supervision, appraisal, one-to-one frameworks, absolutely. Can make it more uniform as well. Maybe using some of those autistic strengths we spoke about earlier, building those processes, so having someone they can build that in. Publicize the idea that people are experts in their own experiences. So lived experience is really important. Absolutely. So if you've got people demonstrating, their neurodiverse traits and how the strength that adds to them, what they do to help kind of make adjustments to their own work or adjustments they've used. And it's really valuable when that's across different kind of sectors or different parts of the organization, different seniorities. People have all got that role model and empowers others to talk, and that's really valuable. Employee communities, definitely, kind of ERGs are really valuable, employee-led resource groups. It really gives people a space to talk, share their thoughts, feel like they're safe, feel like they're not alone. And also a really useful way to gather information. I think you can, as an organisation, learn so much from an employee-led resource group because they can tell you things that need to be improved. you can make adjustments from that as well. So benefit from the individuals, also for the organisation as well. Becky's putting here, so even just having like a postcard, poster, yeah, just sharing information, again, communicating, really useful. So putting it on your desk, staff boards, help kind of talk about it more. So paying lip service isn't enough, not backed up by action, genuine actual support, and ongoing dedication to learn. Yeah, absolutely. So what we're actually doing, I think, because we get a amount of some organisations I used to work with where they do a lot of the value sessions and do these webinars, but when people go and ask for support in their organisations, there's nothing there. So creating those processes and actual support, definitely really useful. It's not just the lip service. It's really important. That also helps build that trust we spoke about earlier. Having good neurodiverse management, so creating, the management, neurodiverse management or neuro-inclusive management is really, really valuable. Please keep sharing. I'll keep moving on, just conscious of time, get some questions as well. I'll quickly share what's available at CiC. So first of all, so our staff have all been trained to understand support neurodiversity. So something we're ongoing process. We're always trying to learn more. So trying to support whether internally with ourselves or with people on our calls as well. So something we have in abundance, which is great. We have a webinar series coming in 2025, which is I'll be putting together. I'll show you some outlines of that on the next coming slides. We have our Ellie wellbeing platform, which is really useful. I'll show you on the next slide as well about what that could look like from a neurodiversity perspective and what's available. In our team, similar to this, we'll offer training for different neurotypes for teams as well, thinking from a HR perspective, management perspective, on how to become more neuro-inclusive. So if you want to find out more, just reach out. And also consultative programs, if you're thinking about making that long-lasting neuro-inclusivity in your organisation, thinking about beyond training, what we're actually doing in our HR teams, in our processes, in our policies. So if you want to find out more about that, just let us know. Again, about the Ellie program platform here. So it's a really useful platform. I think you should have a lot of access to. If not, please do reach out to your relationship manager. They'll be able to help you out. So loads of free resources available, and this is just a quick screenshot of the neurodiversity page. You won't be able to see what's on it, but I'll just share what's there now. So it's documents, videos, podcasts, signposting to other websites, organisations as well. So loads of really interesting information if you want to learn more about neurodiversity. Lastly, neurodiversity webinars for next year. So we're putting together a really dedicated webinar series for next year, looking at particular or specific challenges in the workplaces and strategies to support them. So the reason why we've grouped them this way is because of that overlap we spoke about earlier. So thinking about verbal communication, there can be lots of different challenges that can arise around that, whether it be from dyslexia point of view, dyspraxia point of view, autism point of view, ADHD point of view. So think about all those different challenges and then the different strategies we can put in place. We'll go through these and I think from why this is really valuable as well is we're not just thinking about people with particular diagnosis. Anyone who's kind of feeling they're experiencing some written communication challenges that can come along, and they might learn something new that might work really well for their workplace preferences. So, and also for you as an individual, if you notice that you're having challenges in one of these areas, you can come along. If you as a manager are noticing someone on your team having a particular challenge, you can come along and learn some more about how you can support them as well. So more information to come on that. If anyone needs to, yes, we'll be sending out the dates later this month or next month as well. Thank you for listening. If anyone's got any questions, please feel free to ask now. If anyone needs to shoot off, please do as well. As we said, we'll be sharing the recording later and the slides. I'll come to any questions here. So there's a few bits in the Q&A and a few hands raised. So I will come to the Q&A first quickly. So do Ellie have wellbeing sessions? Yes, there's other information on there, not purely neurodiversity related, a lot around wellbeing as well. It's and lots of different areas of wellbeing. So have an explore and you probably find something that's useful for you. Well, thank you. You're all very welcome. If I've missed a question, apologies. Try and keep up with the chat. thank you, everyone. Very welcome. So I hope you have a lovely evening, lovely morning or afternoon. And just reach out if you've got any questions.